ODM and Azimio One Kenya presidential flag bearer Raila Odinga believes he has some unfinished business as he gives the presidency a fifth and perhaps a final stab. Sheila Sendeyo looks back on Raila's journey to the top that for his supporters has been filled with promise and uncertainty in equal measure.
ODM leader and standard-bearer of the Azimio One Kenya coalition has always seemed at ease on a political platform. Some even say he was born onto it. At 77 years old, the man often referred to as the enigma of Kenya's politics has seen it all. Azimio! Having pursued his political ambitions, undeterred by beatings, persecution, exile and several spells in prison for rallying opposition against the establishment.
I accept this nomination with absolute gratitude.
A case study in political resilience. Odinga is taking his fifth and perhaps final shot at the presidency. And has picked the no-nonsense veteran politician with a reputation for probity and a one-time rival Martha Karua as his running mate.
We have somewhat similar history, having fought in the trenches for the second liberation, having been in the opposition benches together, and continuing with the fight for social justice even when out of government, continuing to fight to see a prosperous Kenya that is inclusive for everybody.
As a politician, Raila has distinguished himself as a pragmatist, always looking into the future and letting bygones be bygones. But he almost never passes up a chance to revisit history. Born into a political family, Raila appeared initially inclined to leading a normal, quiet life as a civil servant working at the Kenya Bureau of Standards, and even getting a teaching job at the University of Nairobi after studying in Germany in the 1960s. But his arrival on the political scene was as dramatic as the rest of his politics would be. He was arrested in the crackdown that followed the 1982 attempted coup and charged with treason. 9 years in detention would be his baptism by fire and the start of an irreversible career that would engulf the rest of his life. The son of Kenya's freedom hero and veteran opposition politician, the late Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, Raila is to date a walking reminder of Kenya's uncomfortable past, and he seems to carry it in his stride and voice.
My brother had asked that I should be allowed to go and bury my mother, but they were telling me 3 months later, yet they received the telegram immediately that my mother had passed on. I mean, they're telling me 3 months after the event. So how would you attend the burial?
A battle-hardened soldier, he had from the start demonstrated an edgy wit that defined him as the de facto leader of the Odinga children, a character that he unabashedly carries onto the national stage. Cutting an independent image in the towering shadows of his father, Raila played a key role in the now famous Second Liberation, and in the ensuing multi-party election in 1992, he stood for election as Member of Parliament in Langata constituency, easily beating his opponents. But he was the quintessential opposition politician of the time, never afraid to mount a rebellion. Following his father's death in 1994, he was embroiled in a bitter contest with the now-deceased Michael Kijana Wamalwa for the leadership of Ford Kenya, triggering a major fallout. He later quit his father's party and formed the National Development Party of Kenya, occasioning a by-election that saw him return to Parliament on a fresh mandate. Raila gave the presidency his first shot in 1997, and though he trailed in third, that run secured him a national profile from which he would launch his future bids. In 2002, he slingshot Mwai Kibaki from an uninspiring campaign to a commanding presidential victory, frustrating retired President Moi's efforts to push through Uhuru Kenyatta as his preferred successor. But the heat of a trashed pre-2002 election MOU began to melt the glue that held the wobbly coalition together.
Memorandum of understanding that we had written before, it was not implemented. And that created now a question of, intro-fighting that delayed the matter of the new constitution.
A riled Raila rallied a section of NARC leaders against a government-backed draft constitution at a referendum and handed President Kibaki an embarrassing defeat.
Following the results of the referendum, it has become necessary for me.
Kibaki, who had for long been considered a courtly gentleman who stirred few passions, took the opportunity to kick Raila and his brigade out. He would then ride on the tightening knot of rage, building up to the 2007 election in his second quest for the presidency. The outcome was highly disputed. Flames of discord swept through the normally placid country, leaving more than 1,300 people dead. And though he'd hoped to be president and insisted the election had been stolen, Raila had to share executive functions under a specially created position of prime minister in a power-sharing deal aimed at ending the mayhem. But he desperately wanted to take that further step. In 2013, he ran again, this time against Uhuru Kenyatta, but lost.
It is my hope that the incoming government will have fidelity to our constitution and implement it to the letter for the betterment of our people.
In 2017, he threw his hat in the ring for a fourth run to challenge President Uhuru Kenyatta again. But with the contested election of 2007 looming over the country's politics a decade on,
our people, united, shall never be defeated.
He led protests against the IEBC, which he alleged to be biased in favor of the ruling Jubilee. Raila was convinced he was headed for victory, and wholesale change at the IEBC was necessary to avoid the fog of rigging claims that marred the 2007 election.
I'm very confident that I will be able to win in first round, not a rerun, by the look of things, because the people of this country desire change, and they see me as representing change.
Until the results read otherwise.
We have no faith at all in the Electoral Commission as currently constituted. They have committed criminal acts. Most of them actually belong to jail.
I therefore wish to declare Honorable Uhuru Kenyatta.
He fought at the Supreme Court to overturn the result of the presidential election and won. It was the first time in Africa, and only the fourth in the world, that a court had stricken out a presidential vote. The Supreme Court ordered a repeat election, but as the credibility questions tugged at the IEBC, Raila called for a nationwide boycott.
I, Uhuru Kenyatta.
The boycott meant President Kenyatta had cleared one hurdle, but what followed was a little more than a colossal obstacle.
We are transforming the NATO coalition into a resistance movement.
The National Resistance Movement called for civil disobedience and a boycott of products and services of companies seen to be sympathetic to the administration. Raila took a controversial oath at the historic Uhuru Park and called himself the people's president.
I can speak without fear of contradiction. That's why I'm speaking with a lot of energy and conviction that I won the elections. And that's the reason why I was able to stand between that huge multitude of Kenyans and hold the Bible. I'm doing it not because I'm mad. I'm not a megalomaniac. I'm a very reasonable Kenyan.
Outside the cabinet secretary for the interior, Raila Odinga again is the only Kenyan politician whose word can cause a public holiday at a time of his pleasure. You remember the Machozi Monday, that he would decide that for the next 3 days, there is no work in Nairobi, and nobody would venture come to the capital city.
But in 2018, Kenyatta and Odinga stunned the country when on the morning of the 9th of March, they shook hands and declared a truce.
The situation is highly polarized in the country. There were demonstrations. There was excessive use of force. People were dying. And there was need for a resolution. So that is really what informed the handshake, to diffuse the explosive situation that existed at that time.
Raila and Kenyatta unsuccessfully tried to introduce sweeping constitutional changes that proposed expanding the executive and parliament to more evenly divide the spoils of election victory.
Nobody can stop reggae.
They went around the country declaring that the reforms under the banner of Building Bridges initiative would help end the cycles of violence. But critics claimed it was a disguised ploy to extend Uhuru's term in office.
I don't think President Uhuru Kenyatta has an intention of remaining in government. He's made it very clear that he's going to be handing over power once his term expires.
I've asked him to embrace.
The handshake was likely one of the final acts in a multi-generational political rivalry stretching back half a century. To when Jomo Kenyatta and Odinga's father, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, vied for control of the nation. Raila's journey, too, has traced his father's arc. His father had led the opposition for 3 decades, but never the country. Now President Kenyatta has backed him to take over. His fiery anti-establishment image has since taken a knock following his rapprochement with Kenyatta. A fixture of public life for more than 30 years and a member of parliament for 20, Raila sees himself as a living martyr to the cause of democracy. A forceful personality to match to supporters and a rabble-rouser to critics, he has been the totem pole around which the country's politics has revolved. His supporters follow him with a near-cultic commitment. He is the undisputed leader of his Luo community. But Raila has over the years expanded his national appeal and hopes at the 5th attempt to win a presidency that is still centrally decided on ethnic lines.
Raila Odinga has got a stellar record when it comes to issues of governance, on issues of anti-corruption, but more important in fighting for liberation. Raila Odinga takes a lot of credit for the 2010 constitution because he's among the few brave men who would actually go to the street and fight for our civil liberties, our civil rights.
Raila Amolo Odinga, the luminary who is constantly in the shadow of power, the veritable kingmaker who's never himself been king, a fortune that the Nili man now hopes to turn on its head as he makes the 5th stab at the highest office in the land. Sheila Sendeo, NTV.